Relaxing your thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. Relaxing thoughts, remaining mindful of your breathing. If a persistent thought or feeling arises, stay with it for a moment or two, recognize it as impermanent, and return your mindfulness to the sensation of breathing. And we'll meditate for 5 more minutes. Take a moment to notice the quality of your mind. Be at peace with your mind. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes. So the idea of Buddhism as a religion is the prevalent idea. Most presentations of Buddhism is a religious presentation, but that was not what the Buddha intended. That doesn't mean that what has developed as religions are some way illegitimate or unauthentic. They certainly are. It's just not what the Buddha taught. But it's a common question. So I'll read from the article a little bit. Saddha, Saddha is S-A-D-D-H-A. Saddha, the question of faith often arises in Buddhism. Is Buddhism a faith-based religion as theistic religions are? Do the teachings of the Buddha require faith in order to practice Buddhism? And that really is nothing to be further from the truth. We don't take anything on faith. In fact, the Buddha insisted on that. That's what that constant reference to ehepasiko, come and see for yourself, means is that you have to come and experience this. If the Buddha did not teach worship of a god or gods or any disincarnate deities, where should anyone place their faith? So here, as you know, I'm referring to the original teachings of the Buddha. While the moral and ethical aspects of the Eightfold Path have some of the aspects of religion, there is no worship of gods, deities, or even of the Buddha. There is nothing that could be considered dogma in Buddhism. There are no teachings or Buddhist commandments that, if not followed precisely, would subject one to punishment from an external supreme force. There is no final accounting, save for one's own mindfulness developed within the Buddha's teachings. There is no higher being or beings to appeal to or to appease in order to develop understanding through the Dhamma. That's important for many people who get into other forms of Buddhist religions. The most prevalent form of modern Buddhism is based solely on continually gaining merit, so that when you die, you'll go to what's presented as a Buddhist type of heaven. And once there, you'll be taken care of forever. And that may entirely be true. I'm not disputing that all the millions of people that follow that are wrong. What I am saying is it's not what the Buddha taught. And when I was still believing in a higher power, a creator God, even though that was always vague and I was never too sure about that, that really affected the way that I looked at the world and the way that I interacted with the world. And there was always this subtle looking over my own shoulder. Am I doing things right? And is what I'm doing right now? And I was doing a lot of things that I would burn in hell for. There was always that tension and always that distraction. And always that underlying thought that if I would just act a little bit better, that my life would get better as a reward, not as a matter of living a skillful life. And that's really where what the Buddha taught and what religious views take you to. That you're doing something in a way to improve your life from an external source rather than just living a skillful life that has its own rewards. These beliefs can be held by someone engaging in the Buddhist teachings as long as theistic views do not cloud the purpose of the Dhamma to abandon all clinging. So many people come to the Buddhist teachings from a religion. It might be a Christian religion. It could be any religion. And as long as, and the reason why I put this in there, as long as your religion doesn't say you can't do this, there's no real reason why you can't develop this. At some point, you're going to come up against the conflicts between what the Buddha taught and his purpose and your own beliefs, but that doesn't mean you should be precluded from developing the Buddhist teachings. There are some religions, and especially some extreme views in certain religions that say that you should never meditate, that if you meditate, and I remember I've heard it presented this way, that if you empty your mind, that the devil's going to come into that empty mind.
which always seemed a little strange to me, that if you're believing in a supreme being, how can an inferior being, even a devil, invade that space thing? So the conflicts are always hard for me to resolve. But that's certainly not true. The point of meditation is not to develop a blank slate. The most significant difference between the Buddhist teachings and most religions, including many Buddhist religions, is the concept of religion as salvation. The Buddha did not teach salvation in the conventional sense, so that through proper adherence to dogma, rules, rituals, and observances, one's salvation would be assured. Salvation, as taught by the Buddha, occurs through one's own actions, as the Buddha himself developed, and are experienced in this lifetime, not as a reward in a future lifetime. He presented the Eightfold Path to be experienced through conviction, which is a better translation of that word Saddha, not followed with blind faith. The Buddha did not see himself as a savior or his teachings as salvific in any general way. He did not see his teachings as a global religion and that everyone should practice what he taught or face dire consequences from him or his agents, which is often how religions are presented. And again, especially the extreme views such as the Crusades or the modern jihads that are practiced. Those are presented from a religious point of view, that they're doing what they believe their God is directing them to do. And in some way, that's saving other people. The Buddha simply taught to anyone interested a way to achieve lasting peace and happiness through understanding the nature of the world we live in. A fundamental understanding of the Dhamma is that complete freedom of choice is to be developed and understood. Whether one engages in the Dhamma is up to each individual. Mindfulness developed within the framework of the Eightfold Path brings awareness to each choice made and whether that choice will develop awakening or further confusion and suffering. And that's exactly what the Buddha taught in Eightfold Path, to be mindful of each factor of the path as a framework for living our lives and as a framework for developing awakening or full human maturity. Saddha is a term that can be translated to mean faith or conviction and is often used in Buddhist teachings to refer to faith. Faith in anything is not required to begin to develop an understanding of the Dhamma or to maintain Dhamma practice. The Buddha taught that his teachings should be examined and practiced and, if found useful, to develop further. The question of Saddha and developing understanding of the Buddhist teachings is critical in setting a clear and purposeful direction of initial inquiry. The often overlooked translation of Saddha as conviction rather than faith is more appropriate in describing the quality of mind in which to initially engage the Dhamma. A short while after the Buddha's awakening, he came upon the 5 wandering ascetics that he had befriended in his search for understanding. They at first wanted to ignore the Buddha as he had rejected their asceticism as unsupportive of gaining understanding and unbinding. And even in asceticism, even modern asceticism, there's this underlying belief, usually pretty subtle, that if I'm engaging in these certain actions, in this sense, extreme asceticism, that there's a reward that is imposed on you simply as a matter of that extreme asceticism. And that has obvious modern connotations, such as when I was growing up, you didn't eat fish and eat meat on certain days and all that. That's a form of modern asceticism, not nearly as severe, but the idea was that you're generating merit by denying yourself certain things. And we all, I remember during Lent, we had to give up something. I usually gave up something that I didn't care about giving up anyway, so it was missing the whole point. But again, it manipulated that whole idea. Upon seeing the radiance of a now awakened human being, they immediately wanted to learn his Dhamma. The Buddha then set the wheel of truth in motion when he taught his friends the 4 Noble Truths. Upon seeing the example of a Dhamma that a human being could engage with and awaken, and then actually learning his simple Dhamma, they were able to generate the conviction to develop their own understanding. There was certainly no blind faith that led to their conviction. They could see through their own eyes the proof of the Buddha's Dhamma. It was right in front of them. Kandana, hearing the Buddha's words, declared, "Whatever has the nature of arising has the nature of ceasing." Through his conviction arising from the example of a human being who awakened and understanding the 4 Noble Truths, Kandana awakened. Upon hearing Kandana's words, the Buddha declared, "Kandana has realized the 4 Noble Truths. He is now Anakandana, the one who realizes, or the one who understands." The Buddha presented his second discourse shortly after his first teaching. He presented the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the Sutta on Not Self. On hearing this second discourse, the other four followers awakened. Through conviction arising from direct engagement with the Dhamma, they awakened. And now the first Sangha was formed, and they took refuge with strong conviction in the Buddha, a human being who awakened through his own efforts and in his Dhamma. So even in modern Buddhism, the three refuges are often presented as that's where we direct our faith. And that's a misinterpretation of the three refuges of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. We're not taking faith in the Buddha. We're taking great conviction in a human being actually did this. And that's an important difference in the way we look at that. So we're not worshiping the Buddha. We're simply acknowledging that a human being did this and that we can do the same. We don't take his Dhamma on faith because it's something that we develop ourselves and directly experience it. We engage with the Eightfold Path with a strong conviction, or another word is to use is right effort, the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path, as a way of developing this for ourselves. And hopefully we can find a well-focused Sangha and take refuge in the conviction that everyone else in that Sangha is using to guide their Dhamma practice. And we're very fortunate to have what's developed here as a well-focused Sangha. Excuse me. Much like any course of study, developing understanding of the Four Noble Truths begins not with faith, but with the conviction that it will deliver what it promises. All that is required is to remain focused on the curriculum. The first factor of the Eightfold Path does not require faith or conviction. Right view initially is a mundane acceptance that the Four Noble Truths are in fact noble and worthy of additional clear inquiry. Initial right view allows for the intellectual decision to engage in the curriculum of the Dhamma. This intellectual decision is made within impermanence as psychophysical beings, or as the aggregate of five clinging factors, five clinging aggregates. We engage the Dhamma as we are, not as we hope to be. Right intention, the intention to recognize and abandon all forms of clinging, generates the Saddha, the conviction to engage and develop in all 8 factors of the path. My own experience with modern Buddhism and with the more esoteric, mystical, and magical aspects of the later developed schools required me to take most of what I was being presented on faith. Many of these later schools treat the Four Noble Truths, including the Eightfold Path, as archaic and not worth serious consideration. This did not generate in me conviction, but only more confusion. How could the Buddha's original teaching and his path to awakening not be the focus of Buddhism? It's Buddhism in quotes. Why must I take on faith the more cosmic and magical view that modern Buddhism presents, or sit endlessly waiting and hoping with blind faith for my Buddha nature to appear? The Buddha taught that waiting for Buddha nature or any other concept of an innate eternal self was founded in ignorance and would only generate more confusion and suffering. The Buddhist use of the word anatta is simply saying that all the views that you hold of yourself are wrong views. Let go of all of those views, including the conditioned view that underneath all of this ignorance is somehow a wise Buddha-like being. And just a little bit, I remember having these thoughts clearly, which led me to question what I was developing, that if underneath or underlying all of this confused thinking that I had, there was an inner Buddha or an inner Buddha nature, why would I chase after it if that Buddha nature was so prone to confusion, delusion, and suffering in the first place? It didn't make sense. And as I started to develop the Dhamma, I realized that was just another conditioned view that was imposed on me. The Eightfold Path can be engaged with conviction. The later school's teachings required much blind faith. When I returned to the original teachings, free of cultural, societal, and individual influences, the Dhamma became accessible, understandable, and highly effective. The Buddha taught a Dhamma intended for human beings to engage with and awaken, to gain full human maturity. Like any study, the Dhamma takes conviction and right effort to develop. Many of the principles do take time to develop. This is why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path. With conviction, engaging the Buddha's Eightfold Path will deliver for any human being with Khandana experience, realization and release, and a mind continually at peace. That's the end of the article. The whole point of looking at the Buddha's teachings, and especially the Eightfold Path as a curriculum rather than something that we're developing on faith, is the best metaphor is if you want to learn something, you want to learn how to change the oil, you want to learn auto mechanics. You're not going to go to a school that specializes in architectural design. You might learn something that's very valuable. It might even be interesting, but it won't get you anywhere in developing how to change the oil in a car. You have to be focused on the teachings that are going to deliver what they promise to deliver. And then you have to stay focused on that. You can't get into other teachings. So just like a high school or a college or university offers all kinds of different classes, each one of those classes doesn't deliver the same type of understanding. So even though there's an infinite number nearly of different Buddhist practices, there's only one that was taught by a Buddha, an awakened human being, and that's a very clear and definable, still definable path, the Eightfold Path, and what's contained in the Sutta Pitaka, the Pali Canon. So that's the point of that, and nothing else needs to be taken on faith. We've all developed that. So maybe, since there's only three of us, maybe that's what we can talk about is how, if you see the difference between developing what you're developing through conviction, or if there's still aspects of it that you're taking on faith, and it's okay if you do. So let's start there. Ladies first. Diane, what do you think of all that?
You really want to know?
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to agree with me or anything like that.
Okay. I think we're all God, all reflections of, some an aspect of God, and without each one of us, God per se is incomplete. I think there's that God spirit or spark inside of us. And I kind of turn off my mind a little bit when things are compared, when going through all the teachings, Christianity teachings, I got really discouraged, especially with the thing that there's one way to heaven, or, one way to live, or something like that. And where I am now in my life, the pertinence and importance of Buddhism to me, or what I'm learning through the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, are things that I really, that we're not, maybe we're in Christianity, in the Bible or the teaching somewhere, but we're not, the whole idea of heaven never made sense to me ever since I was a little girl. I didn't want to walk on.
May I ask why not?
I didn't want to walk on the streets of gold, and I didn't want to go around singing and playing the harp. I wanted to keep learning and growing, and I knew that. I can remember the day I was thinking that in a Sunday school class, and I could never even conceive that things would be, perfect. Because of this, and that's how, and when I think the idea that we're all God began to work for me, is that I'm not better than you. I'm not better than anybody. But I really feel like you're an important person, and we're all important. We're all important to the whole thing. Okay, so is conviction and faith. One of the things that I've been through meditating and through the teachings, one of the things that was not emphasized in Christianity was the suffering, even though we had the suffering of Christ and all that kind of stuff. I was always given the impression, especially with my older brother, that, why couldn't I be like him? He did everything perfectly, and I didn't. I was always messing up, and it was, and I always felt because I wasn't a good enough Christian. I didn't love God enough, or I didn't love Jesus, or I didn't have Jesus in my heart. And I don't know how many times I asked Jesus into my heart, but it never seemed to fit. Kind of, you know, I don't know what was wrong, didn't know what was wrong with me. And when I, through the Course in Miracles and a lot of other teachings that I've engaged in leading me to the program and everything, the evolution of faith and conviction of it is what Buddhism touches is the reality of me, or not necessarily me, but me as a part of everything, or I really like the I making, the not I making, and the non-self and all that, but speaking it the way I think it is, or feel or have a conviction or faith about it is when I wake up, and this is what I started to say, one of the things, and it comes from the metta, when I wake up and after I've meditated and go into my day, most times lately it's just when my head is still on the pillow, I would just say something like, may I do no harm, may I keep all of our entrusted to me safe, and may, somehow their needs be met. And I feel really good about that, because that's even taking care of me, which is what Christianity didn't necessarily put yourself last, was what I kept hearing in it. And I have, throughout the decades that I've lived, I've realized that I can't love another person unless I'm loving who I am. And that's not necessarily Buddhistic kind of language, but I understand. It's the respect, the dignity, the appreciation, the compassion, the empathy, all these things that I was giving to other people. It was like I was crying out for somebody to give to me, and then what I learned in Buddhism, or the class, the Pali Canon is, I have to give them to me first. All those things that I wanted someone else to give me, to love me with, I have to love me. And that's really turning my life around. It's not selfish, not necessarily I-making. But and I think the faith and conviction thing that if I don't have faith in who I am, in my presence or in my abilities or something, how can I expect anybody else to? And
isn't faith, though, something you don't know? Isn't that what it means? Faith. Isn't that something that you don't know? You take it on faith. So you're talking, let me stop right there. For one thing, I don't want to argue with you or debate with you. If you'd rather I just let you talk and leave it at that, I'm fine with that. Because I don't want to do that.
I don't want to argue, no.
Okay, so let's just leave it at that.
The faith thing, I don't think I understood what you said. What did you say?
You said you take yourself on faith. And the difference between conviction and faith is something that you don't know, that you don't have an experience of it.
Okay, what I have found so far in this journey with this teaching is I have gained more confidence, more self-assurance than in anything else, and that's not necessarily I-making. Just I continue to feel really good about myself.
So you're not taking your qualities and your capabilities on faith. You now know that you are a capable and quality human being. And it's not, again, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm just...
Then why doesn't everybody appreciate it?
Well, we can really get into the conversation that will last forever. Why don't... The Dhamma would say it's because of other people's conditioned thinking. The only conditioned thinking we can address is our own.
Well, that's, may I do no harm, may I be useful and keep people safe.
And do you think that grows out of your belief that we're all part of a God?
I don't know.
Again, I'm not trying to argue with you.
I have this.
The underlying theme of what the Buddha taught, and when you believe in God, I'm not arguing with you, even saying what you're saying is wrong. It's that's the overarching belief that ends up into this non-dual reality that we're all one thing, and that really contradicts what the Buddha taught. It's the underlying, that non-duality is something that's been presented in the Vedas that the Buddha rejected. It's the subtle underlying belief that leads to the claim that there's an inner Buddha nature or a Buddhahood. And the Buddha's not addressing those questions at all. He's simply saying that the views you're holding of yourself that are causing confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing disappointment are wrong views. Hence, the first factor of the Eightfold Path is right view. So the point of tonight's talk is whether there's a supreme creator being or not is completely irrelevant. It's not. It's like saying, do I want to eat an orange or climb a tree? They don't. One has nothing to do with the other. But it's very difficult, especially when we have some latent theistic beliefs, to separate something like what the Buddha taught from a religious point of view and not get them mixed up. That's really what has developed. So again, I'm not trying to argue with you. I guess what I'm saying is you can believe in a supreme creator God, but it's not necessary for developing the knowledge.
I don't per se believe in any kind of deity that I would. I had this poem, I used to call it my dirty poem, but it says more of what I believe. God doesn't have a penis, God doesn't have breasts. So that makes God a castrated, nurtureless it. On the contrary, that makes God an unencumbered, uninhibited source of creative energy. Women can't trust anything with a penis, men have lost the fear of rounded breasts. Seems so silly to make a fuss over protrusions put there for procreation first. If you can see me as an unencumbered, uninhibited source of creative energy, and I could see you the same, think of the wonders yet to be gained. It's just basically a poem that does away with genders and all that kind of stuff, and it says works that we have this creative energy, and that's more what I think is than anything.
Interesting. Where's that poem from? Did you get that? You did? Wow. That's cool.
Thank you. Kevin.
This is, I don't know, it's kind of like the crux of Buddhism, or the crux of, in a way, I don't know if it's time but the way I have been searching to be able to do something without me. Because the religion I was brought up in Christian religion, not so very old, but then all my friends were at the most just growing up, so I always wanted to believe in it, and I wanted to, I thought if I could believe in it, then, things would be better, things would be safer, complete, or something. But there was never, seemed like it never answered me, any direct evidence that any of that existed. I'm satisfied. And I thought the idea of hell was kind of nutty in a way. Like, why would we have to do that if we don't believe in the other part, heaven and hell?
Yeah.
So, coming to meditation, it has become evident pretty quickly that that even without believing in something, that if you're, well, gosh, when you start to use words for it, then it starts almost to escape. You know, that.
How about taking refuge?
Yeah, the refuge, yeah. And that.
That's not escape. That's a real thing. It's a real place.
Yeah. I just finished rereading the book, Buddhism Without Beliefs, and I think it's just the same thing. It doesn't. It's a different. He puts it in a different way, but it's also the same thing. It's saying that you don't have to believe in this as a religion, but it's also, you know, understanding the teaching and following the teaching will lead you to that refuge ultimately. So, to me, that's a great word for it. It is a refuge because it's sort of, you know, to be able to attain that peace and that.
Yeah. No matter what's occurring around. There was a time in my life I used to go to Hawaii often, and there's still these places called cities of refuges, and they're scattered all over the islands. And the idea of these places were that, and there was, throughout Hawaii's history, there was all these, you know, each island was controlled by a king. Sometimes there were 3 or 4 on each island. There was always these battles going on, very bloody battles. But they set up these places of refuge, that if during a battle you were so overwhelmed you couldn't stand it anymore, if you could make it to one of these places of refuge, you were left there until the battle or the war was over, and then you were allowed to be repatriated. You think about a very bloody culture, but they still had this little bit of civilization, this place for refuge. They understood that we needed it. And even the places of refuge were usually very, very difficult to get to. Like one on Big Island, I can't think of the name of it now. It's just a magnificently beautiful place. But the only way to get there at that time was you had to swim into this cove. And the cove was notorious for being full of sharks. So you had to be willing to go through that to find your place of refuge. It's somewhat metaphorical for what you have to go through to develop the true refuge of the Dhamma. Again, there's nothing there taken on faith, but you got to put some work in. One of the things that was so confusing to me about Buddhism was, even though they didn't often present it as appealing to or appeasing a certain god, certainly in the Tibetan traditions, there's an endless number of deities that you worship, or there's a lot of visualizations, like the Avalokitesvara is the deity of great compassion, and if you focus on this deity, you're developing compassion in yourself, which I did for a long time, but it never made me more compassionate, and the whole idea there was nothing there to change what was blocking me inside me from being a compassionate human being all the time, even though I certainly wanted to be. And that really was the problem, and I started realizing that there was a lot of substitutions for who I was to what I wanted to be. And that's the real difference. And as I slowly developed my understanding, I realized that that's the idea of an inner type of nature, and this isn't just because you said it, or being part of one grand cosmic being who's directing everything. To me, that's just creating another identity that is a substitution for what's going on with me right now. And so then at some point, there's not a lot of responsibility anymore. It's ultimately like,
just take it on faith and have faith and
yep.
carry it out.
As long as I don't screw up too bad, I'll get my reward at some point. Well, that doesn't do me much good. The Buddha realizes too. It doesn't do me much good right now. It's not bringing a lot of peace and understanding to my mind in this lifetime. And then he always struggled with the idea of endless reward or endless punishment. And if there could be a being that could actually start all this, why would that being want to take, like, no matter how bad my dog is, I would never want him to suffer endlessly, and he's just my dog. But one of my children, you know, God is often portrayed as the parent, God the Father, or whatever you want to look at. How can that be? None of it made any sense to me. So when I came to the Buddha's Dhamma and realized that those questions don't even come into this. It's not, do I believe in a God or do I believe in the Dhamma? It's believe in the Dhamma, and if there is a God, that's fine. It doesn't really, it's not part of the equation. What's most important is what I'm holding in mind and my views of myself in relation to the world around me. And that has allowed me to not act compassionately, to act like I'm a loving person. It actually has allowed me to be an authentically compassionate person, which is completely different. It is completely different. And I'm not saying that I'm completely compassionate all the time, but I'm a whole lot more than I ever was.
The thing that I think needs to be folded in here a little bit too is what comes up in meditation for me anyway are the thoughts I had at various times in my life, which were sometimes very dark, hellish type thoughts, and it's like I can go through a couple hours, or initially it felt like days, thinking that I was worthless. But then the insight would come that this is what other people is in other people, and that it's I don't know. I'm understanding that I did what I did, said what I said, and I can learn from it. Kind of thing. It wasn't a, and then that grew to the compassion for other people, that they often do things or say things that they regret. And I used to judge people for being sick because they thought so wrong.
Yeah.
And wrong thought. Well, I don't think that.
Yeah, that's a fundamental understanding that's developed in the Dhamma. Other people aren't, if other people act in a less than compassionate or loving way, it's not for me to save them. In fact, that need to save the world left when I realized that suffering is part of the world. And people are acting in a certain way, not because they don't have a connection to Jesus or Allah or Abraham or anything. People are acting in a certain way because they are ignorant of Four Noble Truths, and their minds are conditioned. And that leads me to great compassion, because I understand why people are acting that way. You know, I can leave people in peace, but I can also understand, that's why I say it so often here, the most loving thing I can do for myself and for everyone else is to develop the Dhamma, because now I'm not contributing to the suffering of the world. And it's the only thing that I really can do.
And I can't make anybody believe or behave or think anything I wanted to think.
Yes, but
choice.
Religion often is presented that way.
I know.
You know, I go back to Hawaii. It's awful what Captain Cook, they say, is the first European to ever visit the Hawaiian Islands. And the destruction at that time, they had a worldwide economy. They were trading all over the world. The Hawaiian people, Polynesians, they had an incredible society already established. And yet, Captain Cook and then the Christian Crusades ended up there. You're all savages, and you all need to. And they destroyed the culture. And what happened a little bit later on, but that's not just that's happened everywhere, in the name of a self-referential religion. This is my religion. This is my belief. It allows me to do whatever I think is right. And again, you can say, well, look, this is what's going on in the extreme Muslim world, and it is. But there's Buddhists doing this right now too in Myanmar, based on what they think is their right religion. So all of that. The most non-confrontational philosophy that's ever been developed, I think, is what the Buddha developed. And there's others. You know, the Baha'i faith is kind of like that. It doesn't give rise to anything that I think would be aggressive or competitive, but it gets right to the heart of the matter, of the problem of humanity. And the problem of humanity isn't a lack of belief in God. It's a lack of understanding of Four Noble Truths.
One of the part of what I came to realize about the Four Noble Truths is when I suffer, I learn. And if I don't learn, I keep on suffering again and again and again until I start learning something. And I think what I found to the Eightfold Path is I have choices. I don't have to keep suffering. I don't have to keep doing the same thing over again. And I don't know why that never quite got to me earlier in my life. But
well, there's a lot of value placed on suffering in the wrong way. In other words, he suffered and died for our sins. We should do the same, rather than recognizing that there is a choice. There's no value in continuing suffering once you recognize that you're the cause of it, or you're putting the second arrow in. It's from your own craving and clinging that your own individual contributions to suffering are what keeps it going. And we take great faith in the Buddha, or conviction, that he figured it out, and he showed us how to do the same. To live in this world that is prone, the first noble truth says dukkha occurs. If you're here, dukkha is going to occur. It's going to be a part of your life. Sickness, aging, death. Not getting what you want, getting what you don't want. Being stuck in this thing called the five clinging aggregates is suffering. But there's a way out. And there's no magic to it. There's nothing mystical or esoteric about it. And there's nothing hidden. There's nothing that is given to us because we have good karma, or we're good people, or we're of the right class, or the right color, or the right sex, or anything else. If you have a mind, if you're a human being, that's the example of the Buddha, you can develop lasting peace and happiness within this environment that is prone to dukkha. None of it's based on faith, but it does take conviction. Any other questions or comments about this?
Just to say that I think it tracks, and for me with this is it's not a religion. It's not a religion.
Yeah.
You know, even though it's people will class it as a religion. Say you practice that, the Buddhist religion. It's not. You don't have to believe certain things.
Here to develop, there are people that will say, well, don't you have to believe in the Eightfold Path? No. There's nothing there to believe. You take conviction that this is what an awakened human being taught, and then you develop it yourself. A religion would say, if you act a certain way, when you die, somehow you are going to be given your reward. That's faith. That's taking. How can I experience that? I can't experience it now anyway. I can't experience it in this lifetime. But I do know, and we have a small class tonight, but everybody that comes to these classes regularly would say the same thing. Almost immediately, they start feeling the benefits of developing the Eightfold Path. You don't got to wait for it. It's right here. It's right now. And even that's kind of, you don't even have to make that argument for it. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with taking anything on faith. You directly experience it. And even some of the rituals that, in both the Tibetan schools that I was involved with and the Zen schools, there's quite a bit of ritual and subtle forms of worship in the Zen school, even more direct in the Tibetan schools. There was I don't want to talk about it. I was going to mention something that went on at a Zen monastery, but it was just ritualistic in nature, and it was a way of worshiping the Buddha. And when you read the accounts of the Buddha's life, there's never anything like that. You'd think that in all the teachings, that if there was ever that it would be mentioned even occasionally, and it never was that. The only thing that they did was when people approached the Buddha, you bowed down to him, and you sat to one side. Because it's an insult when the Buddha's trying to teach a group to sit right in front of him. That's the only reason you sat to one side. You gave him some space. And this is just a form of respect. That's all it is. And you did that we do it here all the time.
This is a huge question, but I wonder, like in your, as a monk and everything, did you ever encounter someone who was enlightened that you could tell, or they?
That's great.
The head of the monastery where you were.
That's a great question, Kevin. To be honest, no. And which is something that I question too. Like when you read the account of the Buddha's life, a lot of people awakened.
Yeah.
Directly. There's a lot of wonderful people involved in Buddhism. There's some really exceptional human beings that are recognized all over the world. But I don't see one of them as awakened. And when you look at how they live their lives, they're extraordinary human beings. So many of them, you could call them true bodhisattvas. But like the Buddha often described himself, he was an unawakened bodhisattva. He had great compassion, and he had developed it to a high ideal, but he was lacking understanding of Four Noble Truths. And honestly, I've yet to come across anyone that I would say fits that bill. I've known some, pretty amazing people.
Question.
Pardon me?
It's a pretty heavy question.
Yeah, it is, but it also, the man that I took my vows with in the Tibetan Kagyu lineage, and I won't say his name because people do hear this. He was probably he only spoke Tibetan, so I never had a real conversation with him. But he was one of the most remarkable human beings I've ever met, and I would say that he probably was not awakened. But as far as incredible compassion and understanding, you could just see it coming from him. You could feel it being in the room. He was one of those people, when he walked into a room, you knew it. There was a guy who was a non-Buddhist, and he was just a mystical guy, but he had a presence. And the only reason I'm thinking about it because I went to one of his talks, and he had that feeling when he walked out on stage and he looked out into the crowd. It was like he was. And there were 3,000 at the Beacon Theater. There's about 3,000 people there. You really felt like he was looking and talking right to you. He had that kind of presence, but this guy wasn't awakened anymore. He had a lot of understanding about his topic. No, but that doesn't mean that there aren't any.
Yeah. And
it also, it doesn't mean that maybe the people that I encountered were awakened and I just didn't see it. Possible. But when I look at people's actions and some of the things that they say, some of the books that they've written, it doesn't add up. And then there's too many teachers today that are head of certain worldwide organizations that were obviously still stuck in craving and clinging. There's so many stories of people that were active drug addicts and alcoholics and chain smokers sleeping with their students, male and female, and it's just endless stories of that. And yet these are viewed by many people as awakened, and that behavior is excused by saying, well, they're so awakened that it really doesn't matter how they act. How can that be? But yet a lot of those organizations continue, and that's something that I do talk about because it denigrates all of even what the Buddha taught. Because you look at something like that and you say, well, who could even follow this? How can anybody? Because it's presented that this is the teachings of the Buddha, and these people are acting that way, so it's a hurtful way. So. And that's when you take it on faith. You're overlooking the obvious, what's right in front of you, and it's excused away. So, The new book gets into this in a little bit more detail. One of these days it'll be published. I'm adding another section. But the reason why I say that, too, it's important to understand that it's human nature to start adapting and accommodating the Buddhist teachings to fit these other views. And modern Buddhism has more in common with the Vedas and the Upanishads, that has developed into modern Hinduism, than it does with what the Buddha actually taught. And all of it has to do with this subtle desire for a non-dualistic view, which is often viewed as its own type of religion, non-duality. The Buddha taught to see everything in its discrete forms, rather than connected or clinging. The Buddha taught to see things in discreteness. In other words, a good example of that is his description of the ongoing personal experience of suffering, 5 clinging aggregates. And those 5 clinging aggregates cling to everything else. And it creates this subtle doctrine of non-duality, which is really the prevalent belief, the underlying belief in all of modern Buddhism is this non-dual way of looking at the world. And it completely contradicts what the Buddha said. See things discreetly. There's an underlying connection to everything. We're all, like Carl Sagan used to say, we're all part of the stars. Well, that's true. The same elements that make up everything makes up everything. But that doesn't imply that we are all one conscious organism simply because we're all made up of the same elements. That's just a consequence of living in the world. And we're all connected at the level of conditioned thinking. But the Buddha taught to understand that and let go of that connection, that common connection that we all have. The more that we create a doctrine over non-duality, or we're all under one kind of Buddhahood, we're maintaining that clinging nature, aren't we? And we're clinging ourselves, our identity, to something bigger than anatta, what the Buddha said is just not it. It's not true. Let go of it. There's some safety in that to a self-referential ego personality to be attached to something else, isn't it? Whether I identify myself as a Christian or a Muslim or part of one grand cosmic being, there's some safety in that. But that safety, where's the motivation for safety? The motivation is for continuing your self-identity. And that's where that subtle, the book gets into this more deeper. That's where that subtle substitution for an inner Buddha nature or a Buddhahood comes in. Because, well, what happens if I let go of all these self-referential views? There must be something else for me to establish me in. Buddha nature. Buddhahood. The Buddha never said that. He never said he awakened to his own Buddha nature. He never called himself Buddha in any way. He simply said, I let go of all wrong views. So, wow, good class. Again, any other questions or comments? No? We're good. Okay. We'll finish with metta as we always do. So find your relaxed meditative posture. Gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And again, take a moment to become aware of the sensation of breathing in your body. And let that mindfulness of your breath cease any distracting thoughts to the past or to the future, or that may have arisen from our talk tonight. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, free from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you for a wonderful class. Peace. And one announcement, our picnic is coming up July 15th with a rain date of the 16th. There's info on the website. Yep. Yep, at Moore's house.
Oh. Wow.
Everyone's invited, family, friends, dogs, cats, gerbils.
You can have the pool open?
Pool will be open. Robin's doing well, Kevin?
She is. That's the same enough.
Please tell her I said the same.
Okay.
And the kids too?